Welcome, everybody, to episode number 109 of Underserved. Joining me today is Kevin Kreucher, Senior Director of Technology Operations at Grocery Outlet. Let's get started.
Welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry, where we focus on stories of tech industry leaders, their insights, and their lessons learned. And now, your host, Andrew Jelina.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today on Underserved.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
So way back in the day, Mom and Dad were in sales and Mom hit some goals and got a prize. What was it?
She got a computer. She brought a computer home. We set up a desk and she left it there. Kind of left it up to us to jump into it.
And what'd you jump into? Were you into games or?
Yeah, I was very much into games. The first set of games I got were by a company named Sierra, and they made a whole bunch of King's Quest and Space Quest and a whole bunch of other different games. And so they were kind of storyboard games where you would have choices of do X and you get Y, or do A and you get B. And they were fun. And so I would dive into those and I would spend hours and hours and hours. With the games, I think there was, 7 or 8 discs. So as you were playing the game, you'd have to put in those floppy disks. And it was fun getting used to the technology, but more fun for me to play these games and feel like I was part of that adventure.
The old floppy swappy. Kids these days, they don't know how good they have it with one giant hard drive. So any courses in middle school or high school or?
Back then, there wasn't any computer courses that I recall.
And then you had some formative events in 97?
97, yes. I become an alcoholic and was drinking, around the clock, and that takes a toll on life. And so through a series of events, primarily a family intervention, I went into rehab. Fortunately, and by the grace of God, licked that problem, and came out of rehab May or June of 97 with a few months sober. And I recall, they call it a get well job. The job that I had got was working at a pet store. Mom came down from Anaheim to Newport where I was, and, we went to grab lunch and we were talking about next steps. What was the future going to hold? And she just made, I think, some offhand comment of, you've always been good at computers and that sort of thing. What do you think about going to school for computers? At that point, it sounds great. And so from that point, I reached out and signed up for DeVry.
And what'd you study there?
My undergrad was telecommunications management. There was a few tracks there. As I was reading through the different tracks that they had, it was technical, and then there was this telecommunications management. And I think as we talk here, you'll see this story unfold. But, at the time, there was something about the super duper technical that it wasn't for me. And so I think the telecommunications and the management piece, I was like, yeah, that's the one I want to do. And so I started and I got a bachelor's of science in telecommunications management.
And did you get to kind of enjoy the camaraderie of DeVry? Were there other folks there of the same mindset and fired up about learning tech?
There absolutely was. Earlier today, a guy that I went to school with, Eric, sent me a LinkedIn message and said, hey, 22 years has been long enough. We need to grab some lunch. By the way, here's my website. I just opened up what appears to be a managed services company. But there was a group of guys and gals, actually, maybe a good 10 that we all had the same classes together. And I had went to school before I had got sober unsuccessfully. And so I didn't really have much of a college experience or didn't really have much of anything in that realm. For me, this was my true college experience. And so I was working at night and I was going to school during the day. And, I built a really cool little friendship with a group of folks. And we went through the entire program together.
Now, you eventually end up getting a job at CRC Health Group, the same center where you had received treatment.
Yeah, when I went through there, the program was growing. It had continued to grow. And so by the time I had gotten my degree, one of my best friends that I had gotten sober with, he was working there as a counselor. So he went to school and got the certifications and he was, counseling patients, but the center had grown exponentially. And he was talking to the owners and said, look, we really need a full-time technology person. Letting us all do this on our own and kind of fielding these things, it's not working. And so they brought me in and said, hey, would you be interested in being the IT manager for the treatment center in Newport? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so that was my journey there. The word I would use would be playground. It was Staples or Office Depot or Best Buy computers with, generics. It was just a homegrown net, but there was some infrastructure and stuff. stuff there. So it really was, me learning about these things and working through different challenges. And it was a fun playground. I learned a ton. And then that treatment center got acquired by CRC Health Group. And everybody was really nervous about a parent company coming in and taking over and, super nervous and probably about losing their job or, how is this going to affect, what we've had. And for me, I just went into it with an opportunistic type mindset. And I really got along well with the CTO of CRC Health Group, Jay. And, he took a liking to me and thus began my journey with CRC Health. I was there, I think, about 6 years. Pretty quickly after the acquisition, I got promoted to a regional IT manager, which was my first introduction to actually managing folks.
And you got a taste of, I have to manage and remotely support sites that I've never set foot in.
It was interesting. I was, home based in Newport Beach, and I had access in a 3-minute walk to different offices to physically support everybody, and now I'm responsible for a facility that's in Tucson, Arizona, and a guy. And so, we're doing the flying back and forth, regularly and working out, that sort of thing. But as things progressed, I got promoted to director of IT field support. So ultimately, I was responsible for field support for about 150 locations all over the US. And the coolest part there, this was back in the day, there wasn't really traditional managed service providers at that time. There wasn't really companies that you could call that you could say, I need support here, but there was a few smaller shops. And so what I ended up doing was building relationships with these smaller companies that had kind of a smaller footprint of resources around them. And we were solving problems nationally with these groups of people. And what I realized, holy crap, we're supporting 150 facilities, most of which I've never been to. The resources that are supporting these people I've never met. And all the direction and explanations are happening over the phone. But yet we were achieving the results that we were needing. At the time, I think I just took it for granted. But really what it came down to was, certainly there's a technology aspect, but really was all about relationship management. I was able to build these relationships with these folks, and I was able to communicate in a way that they understood the expectations, they understood what I was asking for, and we built this sort of transactional, here's what I need, you're going to go do it, I've finished, and we just expanded on that. And so sitting back thinking, man, we're able to support a pretty broad set of facilities and resources in areas that I've not physically laid eyes on. So it was kind of a cool time to be in tech for me.
So you guys were pure virtual distributed before it was cool.
Yeah, definitely before it was cool. We had a few regional guys, but, for 150 facilities, nowadays, you're going to have a pretty deep bench of, call it middle management and resources and network and service desk. And, you're going to have people. Back then, it was these facilities were being acquired like hotcakes. And so you were trying to onboard them, first of all, and then you were trying to support them. And it was a challenge, but, we made it work.
Well, with having a national footprint, it becomes kind of a 24/7 job. You mentioned that you'd often wake up to 80 emails from the East Coast. What do you decide next?
That was a wonderful job. Just like, Sober Living by the Sea, Playground and me really growing as a professional. CRC Health Group provided just this runway of so much experience. But it was healthcare. And it was, national, and I was responsible for national field support, and it got to a point where, I would wake up, like you said, and there would just be this backlog of emails. And so it really became this 24-hour-a-day environment. I think part of it, too, is likely my personality. I have a tendency to be a people pleaser, and I'll do whatever it takes, whenever it takes. I believe I was compromising, my physical, mental health to keep up with the demand of the job. And, wife had gotten pregnant and we were about to have our first kid. And I just reflected and said, I really, as much as I love this job, as much as I love Jay, my boss, and I love what I was doing, I felt like I needed something different, from a work-life balance perspective. And so I started looking for jobs.
And you end up at Merit Property Management?
Merit Property Management. That was about a 20-minute drive from my house. It was a property management company. Most of the work that I did, 90% was all done out of the corporate office in South Orange County. Literally polar opposite from a work-life balance perspective. It was a 9 to 5. It was a no calls after hours. It was very much an environment, that was conducive to building a family.
You are listening to the Underserved podcast. Underserved is produced by Maris Consulting Group, embracing the power of people in technology. For more information, visit mariscg.com. That's mariscg.com.
But the M&A comes calling again and changes the tune.
They do, yeah. A series of events, parent company came in and took over, and decisions were made that they were going to eliminate regional IT directors and put all those functions under one guy. And as much as I disagreed with that approach, I didn't have much say in that. And so, I got the call that my position would be eliminated. But there was a silver lining there, and I thought it was a very pivotal moment. And I think it really lends and speaks to the relationships that I had built. So I wasn't just solving technical problems and, pushing keyboard keys and stuff. I really had built a brand and I had built relationships. And so, Merit Property Management, the leadership there said that, hey, unfortunately, we're going to need to lay you off, but we love and respect you so much. We're going to give you 90 days to find another job. We believe in our hearts that you're going to do everything you can to transition your role. And so what we want you to do is help transition. And then the next 60 days or so, your only job is to go find another job. I think that's fairly unheard of. Companies, when they cut ties, they cut ties. Maybe they give you a week or whatever, but this was 90 days of runway for me to find another job. And, fortunately for me, I was able to find something, relatively quickly. Just like I left CRC, I left those jobs intact. And, my current boss mentioned something a few years ago that it is totally okay and acceptable to love the company that you work for and love the people that you work for and love the environment, but perhaps not be in love with the work anymore, right? And so for Merit, mad love for all those people, mad respect, love the job technically, and how things fell out, it wasn't there, right? And so I left under unbelievably great terms, and my boss, Karen, I still have contact with her every now and again. And so, moving on.
Wherever possible, you always want them to check the would rehire box.
Would rehire, for sure. Sure.
So where do you go next?
So I went next to a bank, which was an interesting job. I was hired as a vice president of IT, which I thought was kind of a cool title change, from a director of IT to a vice president of IT, not realizing that everybody at a bank is a vice president, but it still was, it was fun. Small kind of private, focused bank. And it was super stuffy. It was suit and tie every single day. It was, rules like you couldn't take your jacket off in the office. And it was just super duper stuffy. It wasn't really the job for me, but I think at the time, even though Merit had given me this beautiful runway, I still felt like I was under the gun, that I needed to find something, quickly. And so perhaps I compromised on culture, perhaps I compromised on, what that job really would entail outside of technically. And, so here I am at this job, and it was not what I was looking for at all.
It's not the right job, but when you have a right now feeling, it can temporarily be the right job while you look for something else. You met some folks there and find out that a friend has an IT shop. How does that change things?
Yeah, so that really was my introduction to IT managed services. Traditional, that's what they focus on. And so kind of rolling back to the CRC days, I was doing that in some form or fashion, maybe untraditionally or non-formally. But this was like my high school friend had a company, and that's what he was doing. He had a group of technicians and folks that were supporting as, many clients as he could acquire. And his company had grown to the point of where he was able to bring on, an executive. And so he hired me as a chief information officer and a virtual chief information officer. So, my role really was to manage, the operational functions within the company, but also I would go out on these client visits and I would act as a virtual CIO. So these companies were generally smaller, and it was construction and it was healthcare and it was all different types of smaller companies that perhaps their revenue or whatever it is didn't warrant a full staff. So you hire this managed service partner that has everything from, level one service desk all the way to, say, my role, which would be a virtual CIO. And so we would host these meetings and we would guide them and strategize and put plans and things together to grow their businesses under this managed services agreement, which was a pretty cool experience, especially getting to touch all these different kinds of business. So, I had been in property management, I had been in healthcare, I had been in banking, and now the door opens and I'm in manufacturing and I'm in construction and I'm in healthcare, so it was a really neat experience working in managed services.
And you got to build out the type of managed services company you wished you could have hired, almost 10 years before that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the kind of pivotal things there was, it really was around process. So how do you support as many companies as possible with the fewest resources? I want to stress that, service is important, right? Great service is important. You don't want to lose clients and you want to do a great job. But the whole point of kind of IT managed services and the way that it was structured was around you're paying based upon the number of endpoints. And so, one of the key metrics we would use was how many tickets per endpoint per month were there. And so that would be your initial metric that you would look at. And what we would do is we certainly would solve, tickets reactively as they came in. But one of the cool things that this company did was they had a dedicated proactive services administration. So it was a team of folks that all they did was work on issues proactively. So trying to fix issues that haven't happened yet, doing maintenance and doing all those things that you should be doing to prevent some sort of failure or issue down the road. And so what we would end up seeing was a significant drop in tickets per endpoint per month. And the interesting thing is you're paying for, these type of services. And so at some point you would get the call or you would be meeting with the client and they would say, we're paying you X amount of dollars a month. We've been paying you that. And what we're noticing is that our tickets have significantly decreased. So shouldn't we get a discount in the amount we're paying per month? And so
We should pay more,
right? And so part of the virtual CIO role was to explain, look, we're still doing the work. We're just doing it in a different way, proactively. And not only that, your associates, your people, your employees are much, much more productive, right? So, maybe they had, 5 tickets per month, each person, right? And now we're down to a 0.5 or a 1. Explaining it to them in that way that, hey, we're still doing the work. It's happening in a different way. And so then you take all those processes and you try to rinse and repeat. Which ones can we automate and which ones can we put out globally? And do we select technologies that allow us to do things, automagically, so that you're providing this wonderful, awesome support with less manual work, with less resources, automation, and then, you just continue to hire clients into that model and exponentially grow.
And so you took the knowledge that you gained there and end up working with some other IT managed service providers?
Yeah. So, going from Sober Living to CRC, which was national, and then Merit, which was pretty large, the managed service providers were very small. We're talking, maybe 10 employees to maybe 30, 40. And so, I think it just got to a point where, maybe I felt like I had run the course, I had helped them grow. I had done what I needed to do. I think it was a good, 4 or 5 years. I bounced around to a few different shops. And then the last shop that I ended up was ProSum. They certainly had a managed services arm, but they were more primarily focused on recruiting. Their value proposition was really in hiring, recruiting, that sort of thing. And so, I was working there in the IT managed services shop. And that was kind of my last piece of the managed services puzzle.
And so what do you do to find your next gig?
I think at that point, there was this kind of yearning for some kind of depth or some kind of maybe a different environment or a different type of culture. And so, I really began a pretty heavy search. And so what I did was I went on LinkedIn and I typed in CIO, Orange County. And I clicked, enter, and, all these results came, and I friended every single one of them. And then once they accepted the request, I copy pasted, hey, I'm Kevin, I'm doing this and I've done this. And, here's what I'm looking for, just kind of throwing things out there, and a few people replied to it. But one of the persons that replied was Harrison Lewis. And he was working for Northgate Markets, which is a really beautiful Hispanic grocer in Southern California with stores in Orange County, Riverside, Inland Empire, LA County, kind of condensed. There was about 40 supermarkets at the time. And so he asked if I wanted to grab some lunch. And so I met him over at the Irvine Spectrum at a Mexican restaurant. We had a great lunch and collaborated, and it was just a great conversation. And I'm thinking, man, this is going really well. I mean, I'm impressing this guy, and it's been a great, fruitful conversation. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I really like you. You seem like a good guy with a lot of experience, he said, but, unfortunately, I don't have any opening, for you at this time. Okay. Appreciate the lunch and, thanks. It was great meeting you. And, so I kind of went on my way. And then about a year later, Harrison calls up and said, hey, I have a way I want to bring you into Northgate, and I'd like you to come in. I want to discuss it with you. And so I met him at the office and kind of talked through it. And he said, all the work you've been doing, you really seem like you have a knack for infrastructure and you have a knack for support or operations. And I said, yeah, that's been my space. And he said, well, I've got a proposition for you. It may sound a little odd, but I'd like to bring you in as an IT project manager to Northgate Markets. There is a plan to get you into the director of infrastructure seat. And so I was like, IT project manager was just out of left field. Like, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. But there was something about Harrison, and maybe it's the authenticity or maybe it's the level of confidence. I decided to trust him, and I met with the PMO there, Brenda, and decided, hey, I'm going to give this a shot. There was something about it. There was something about the company. There was something about him. Something just told me, like, just jump in. And so I jumped into IT project management at Northgate Markets and a retailer. And I never had been a project manager. I'd never really been in retail, certainly to that degree.
And what do they have you project manage at first?
At first, it was very much in line with kind of things I've been doing, wrapping up an Office 365 migration. There was some firewall work that we were doing. I think the first kind of retail related project was EMV, so the chip readers. So we're converting pin pads to that. And then Harrison and Brenda come to me and they say, hey, we're going to be opening a store in Anaheim, Store 40, and we want you to project manage opening this supermarket. And I about fell out of my seat. I was like, what do you mean? Well, you're going to open up this supermarket, soup to nuts. And you're talking about a giant supermarket with all this infrastructure. I mean, just my mind was like overwhelmed. So what ended up happening was, I jumped right in and I asked questions and I got involved. And I think it was about a 9-month period. I was involved in every nut, bolt, nook and cranny, zip tie, you name it, put my blood, sweat and tears into that store opening. The comments that I got, at grand opening was, that there really hadn't been many grand openings from a technology perspective that went as well as that. And I'll be honest, when they cut the ribbon for the grand opening, I may or may not have shed a tear, and it really was because I was so proud of the work that the team had done. I was so proud of the leadership and the management that I showed in something that in my mind was so daunting. And I recall walking into that store the first day of project, and it was a giant piece of concrete. There was literally nothing in there. It was a big, huge box. And you fast forward to when they grand opened, and it was an absolutely beautiful, and there was so many components and pieces and things that had to come together to be able to sell groceries to the customer base. And so I was just so proud of the product that we had created.
Hey, sport. How was school today?
It was okay, Dad. How was work?
Actually, I had a rough day. Leading an engineering team is hard. I mean, I have to ship new software, meet deadlines, and tackle new projects while keeping my team focused on the day-to-day. It's hard to keep up.
Jeepers, Dad. Why don't you call Maris? They're the staffing firm with the best technical resources around. They helped Billy's dad. He used to be stressed out like you. He was missing deadlines, his team was overworked, and a bunch of folks left the company because it was too stressful. But then he called Maris. And they put resources to work right away. He hit all his deadlines and freed up his team to do other work. His boss was so happy that Billy's dad got some extra time off.
Time off? Wow. What did he do with that?
He spent it with Billy.
Aww. That's a swell idea, son. I'll call Maris today. Now, you go wash up for supper.
Well, often the reward for work well done is more work. What do you do?
What I do is I just continue to take on more and more complex projects. And, I didn't realize it at the time, but having built the confidence that I needed with that project, I just rinsed and repeat. If I could build a supermarket from scratch and be successful, why could I just not apply that logic, anywhere else? We haven't really talked about it much, but, I had struggled through different various jobs with an unnecessary need to be super crazy duper technical. I had this itch that everybody else was more technical than me. And so I think there was a bit of challenge there that I had put these expectations on myself, in the roles that I was in, that I needed to really, from a network administration perspective, I needed to be as technical as a network administrator. But I'm not a network administrator or a server administrator. I'm not a server administrator, and so at the end of the day, having completed that store successfully, I kind of proved to myself that not only do I not need to be as technical as everybody else, I really don't want to. And so that really was the pivotal moment of my passion passion, my joy, where I get the most reward is logistics and planning and projects and putting teams together and taking an idea and pushing it all the way to implementation. And the output of that was that all these people performed together in an orchestra and delivered a product that the business wanted. And I wasn't logging into switches. I wasn't configuring servers. I didn't have a crazy Excel spreadsheet where I had physically went in and pushed buttons and done things, but I had really led the entire team. And so I fell in love with project management. I was able to work on any project you could come up with because I understood the basics of project management and how those things all worked. And so it really was, what's next? How can I apply what I've learned to any sort of project?
After your successes on these projects, Harrison makes good on his word and makes you director of IT. How do things change then?
Well, first and foremost, he had come to me and said, hey, I've got this plan and I want to push you into the director of information technology infrastructure. And I said, well, wait a minute. Whoa, let's back up a minute. I'm in love with project management. In so many words, had decided that, my end goal was not going to be the CIO anymore. My end goal was going to be the project management officer. I mean, I've absolutely killed it here for the last 3 or 4 years. Look at the successes that I've had and look at the brand that I've built and all this stuff. And so he and I had a really nice heart to heart. And he told me a story from back in his day. And Harrison he's a fantastic leader. But what he really is he's an incredible architect. So, understanding all the nuts and bolts and things from an architecture perspective, that was his passion. So he was going down the architecture route for quite some time. And he had a mentor that essentially convinced him that, hey, yes, you are great at architecture. You are great at this, but you would be really great in a leadership and a CIO role. And so he was very hesitant at the time, but this mentor he trusted. And so he took the leap into management as a CIO, and for Harrison, the rest is history. I mean, he's been CIO for many years and super successful all over the place. And so he was telling me look, I didn't take this for granted. And even though I was afraid or scared or unsure, I took a leap of faith and, it worked out. And so he saw some of that in me and he said, look, you are a fantastic project manager and you've done a great job. That's not the end of the road for you, that you really are a director guy. You can take everything you've learned in your past jobs. You can take everything you've learned in project management and you can apply all that stuff into this director role, that it's not an and or, you can do it all in a director role. And so I said, sure, man, I trust you.
Now, why do you say that your phone is your best technical tool in your tool belt?
Rolling back to the need to be super technical, what I think I did at the time is I overcompensated my belief that I needed to be super crazy technical, which I didn't want to be. I still don't want to be. I overcompensated by building relationships with those people that I knew could do the jobs and do the things that I needed them to do. And so, I enrolled, all these different people and built this phone book of, whatever it was, wherever it was, whatever you needed, I knew somebody, I knew the guy. And I had such great relationships with these folks that it really was nothing more than just a quick phone call. Hey, I need your help. Can you jump in here? What do you think about this? Let me run this by you. And so, as I look back upon my career, what is my single greatest tool? It's my phone book. I have built so many relationships. Many of the partners and vendors and things that I use today at Grocery Outlet, I used 15, 20 years ago. I mean, I have relationships. Or, maybe there's a topic and I'm in hot water, or I need some advice. I got somebody I can call to run things by. And so, what I've built is this, I think, beautiful brand of interpersonal communications and relationships where it really is a true partnership. That's really what's kept me going, is these ideas that are built out of strategy or growth, or we want to do this, or we have this need. And I'm just not afraid because I have such support and I've done this so many times that it's nothing more than a phone call away to get the ball rolling, pulling people together, explaining the business goals, explaining, where the business wants to go to the team and putting the plan together and executing. It's been a beautiful ride of continued implementations.
Now, when you're at Northgate, you decide to move to the cloud, but you had an interesting objection to Amazon. Like, hey, wait a minute, they're a grocery competitor.
Sure. And that was the time I think Amazon had dipped their toe into retail. as we were RFPing for, Azure, AWS, we're looking at Google Cloud. It's like, Google Cloud? And so, Harrison at the time was working with our data leaders on building a data lake. So we wanted to have a place where we housed all our data. This is in Google Cloud Platform. And I recall we went down to one of their offices. It was, I think, in LA somewhere in like an airplane hangar. And we were going through presentations and we were talking through different aspects and strategy and kind of our roadmap. And, Harrison and I were just both blown away, as was the others that were there. Primarily, their information security is pretty awesome. They do a really, really great job there. And I think on the drive home or when we got back to the office, Harris and I were chit-chatting about our visit, and he looked at me and he said, man, why don't we just put everything in Google Cloud? Let's do it. And so, part of it was certainly Amazon being a competitor with the retail, but we were just super impressed with Google Cloud. And for me, I love Google. I'm still an Android guy. Google's a cool company. There was just a lot of draw there. I think at that time, I don't know that there was many companies or a lot of companies that were going all in with Google Cloud. I mean, maybe you used part of it or you used it for this, but putting the entirety of your infrastructure into Google Cloud, I don't think that was commonplace. But we said, hey, we're going to do it. We're going to put everything in Google Cloud.
Shortly after you finish the project, Harrison leaves. How does that kind of change things for you?
Yeah, it was a good 1.5 year long project. We migrated 2 different data centers into Google Cloud and, essentially had built out this cloud-based compute and storage infrastructure. And we had implemented SD-WAN for the network. And, we had just done a ton of work on the infrastructure that would allow Northgate to just continue to grow. It was totally scalable. We'd gotten to a point where all the heavy lifting was done. And then Harrison ends up leaving Northgate. And as much as I was disappointed with that, he's absolutely a mentor for me. I mean, like, he's my guy. We are very close. We've been very close. And as much as I was disappointed with him leaving, I did feel like I had, a really great opportunity. And it really felt like he had groomed me for next steps. We had worked together and there was this path like, well, okay, he's leaving. That sucks. But here's an opportunity. And so the CFO was running the IT department at the time. So I threw my name in the hat and said, hey, I want to step up and I want to be the CIO. I want to put my name in the hat here.
And what happens next?
What happens next is a couple of the other directors actually put their names in the hat as well. And the CFO ended up calling one of his friends that had recently retired and just hired him without really any sort of hiring process, without meeting with anybody. It was a tough decision. I understand, he had experience with this guy in the past, and really it was a big disappointment. I'd felt like I had really built a brand in a few different roles at Northgate. I had established myself as a leader. There was all kind of indications that I could do the job, or at least that I would be acknowledged or interviewed, or just a quick decision that, we're going to hire this guy. And so, kind of taking everything that we had done and kind of where we were at, and Harrison leaving and this new guy coming in, what I really kind of was thinking was that I was going to need to train this guy. The next year or so, I'm just going to roll everything back and I'm going to need to train and bring him up to speed. And, he's going to want to undo and redo and do new. And I wasn't really interested in that.
What do you do instead?
I call Harrison, and that was where he made the decision that, I'll say it today, I love grocery outlet, and it's becoming or close to becoming my favorite job of all time. I love working for grocery outlet, but Northgate was a very special place. I think primarily because it was family owned. The Hispanic culture is it's a beautiful culture. Everything from the food to the music to the events that they had, the grand openings. It was a beautiful environment. And I was in love with that. There was times, and I probably even said it out loud, that I felt like I would probably retire out of Northgate. I loved it so much. But, his comment was, look, man, you can love the company and you can love the people and you can love everything you were doing. And it's okay to not be in love with the work anymore. They're not together. It's separate. Right. And so, as I thought about that, look, man, I have nothing but love for Northgate Markets and the family and the people there. The technical work had run its course. Me being a guy, I'm looking for growth. And so I decided to make a move. And so I went and worked for a partner of Google's number one managed services partner. And ironically, the partner that helped Northgate move to Google Cloud, I went and worked for SADA Systems for about 6 months. And I think it was a really great move, an awesome position for me to get out of what I was doing, a nice breath of fresh air. And then about 6 months later, Harrison had already landed at Grocery Outlet. And he called me up. I recall I was in the drive-thru of Chick-fil-A. I think earlier in the day, my wife had said, "Have you talked to Harrison lately?" And I said, "No, it's been a while. It's been a month or so." Just offhand. And then we're in the drive-thru and the phone rings and it's Harrison. And I look at my wife and go, "Oh my God, it's Harrison." And so I answer and he goes, "Are you ready?" And I was like, ready for what? Like he had just totally caught me off guard. And he said, I need you over here at Grocery Outlet. We're doing some amazing work and there's a position for you here. And so, a couple of weeks of interviews and there we are.
So before you tell me about Grocery Outlet, what's your favorite Chick-fil-A order?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm a vegetarian. I've been vegetarian for like 10 years or so. So I think the French fries are pretty darn good. The Chick-fil-A drive-thru is for the kids, right? I got 2 kids, so they love the chicken.
I like the lemonade too.
They actually have a shake that I saw the other day. It's like a caramel chip shake. It's absolutely wonderful.
All right, we'll put it on the list.
Yeah.
So Harrison convinces you to join Grocery Outlet. What have you been up to there?
So I got hired on as Senior Director of Infrastructure. And, not a whole lot different than Northgate, kind of in the landscape of what things looked. It was, local data centers. It was older equipment. It was a general, network. And Grocery Outlet has grown. They were private for a long time and huge trajectory growth. And then they went public a few years back. And so it really is around growth and setting the company up for that next phase, that next evolution. Again, started out as Senior Director of Infrastructure, and then a little ways in was given information security operations, and then given data operations, and then ultimately given service desk operations, and a title change to Senior Director of Business Technology Operations. So the way that we're organized is really in a build versus run. I manage everything under the run bucket. So anything operational, anything with running the business all rolls up to me. And so we've went through just about every piece of infrastructure and upgraded and replaced and standardized and implemented processes and, introduced change management and incident management and, service desk operations and, store network refreshes and, you name it, we've touched, just about every piece there. And so taking all of my experience up to this point and rolling all the operational functions under me, I am now managing from a service support perspective, delivering killer, unbelievable, fantastic customer service, but also solving all those problems and managing the underlying infrastructure. And so it was kind of a culmination of all those different pieces and puzzles, projects and hardware refreshes and metrics and service level agreements and you name it. I was doing everything, I am doing everything that I had previously done, but all under one sort of banner.
So when you're not solving problems, leading projects, and so on, like many tech folks, you get way into your hobbies, maybe a little too much. What are you into?
Yeah, my mantra really is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. Why do something if you're not going to go all in? And so we had bought in a house and, I was looking at the landscape and it was really, really bland. And so, I decided I wanted to kind of upgrade that. Where do you go? You go to Home Depot. And so I go to Home Depot and found myself in the cactus and succulent section. And as I was looking at some of these things, I was like, man, these are really beautiful and kind of different and unique. And realizing that, we live in a climate that these things thrive, even though a lot of these plants aren't native. And so I bought a few of those and kind of planted them around the yard. And, that was pretty fun. I don't know why I was on like Craigslist or one of those. And it was this lady said, clearing out yard or getting rid of a bunch of cactus and succulents free. And so my wife and I drove out there and it was this super nice lady. And her yard was just overgrown. She just had too much. And so she was just kind of purging and pulling stuff out. And we ended up, I think, with 2 truckloads of cactus and succulents, big giant agave plants and things, brought all those home and planted them. And I recall there was an agave perii, just this beautiful kind of off gray rosette, this older plant. And I was looking at it one day and I said, gosh, that is just phenomenally beautiful, like Fibonacci patterns. And it was just this natural art. And I just was like awestruck. And then I made the famous mistake of hitting Google and typing in agave plants. And then you see all the pictures of, the different agave plants. And I was like, wow, I need to have one of every single one of those. And so I went down the rabbit hole of finding and collecting different agaves. The interesting thing is I just applied the same methodology I applied everywhere else. Is I just built relationships with the right people, right? So I knew all the backyard growers. I knew all the big time growers. I knew where all this stuff was. And so I just built relationships with anybody and everybody that I needed in order to find and get further down this rabbit hole of this hobby. And so, fast forward 4 or 5 years later, 20 foot by 8 foot greenhouse in the backyard with, 1,000 plants in it, the front yard grass removed and a huge garden planted and big giant, aloe trees in the backyard and, an Instagram account with, 35,000 followers and stickers that say crazy for cactus and the whole thing. And it really has become a beautiful hobby, a yin to my yang, computer guy by day, cactus dude by night. I've really enjoyed the hobby.
So you have an Instagram account with pictures of cacti that has 35,000 followers?
Yes, sir. And it's one of those things where you wouldn't know unless you know. That hobby is about as deep and wide as it gets. There are fanatics, obsessed plant people that, collect different types of cactus, succulents, aloes, plants, lithops, just weird one-off stuff. I mean, it is so deep. There are cactus clubs all over the country. Hundreds of people show up on a weekly basis to talk about cactus. There's cactus and succulent shows and sales where people bring their best plants staged in their most awesomest pots. And, they celebrate the love of collecting something that is alive. Not dissimilar maybe to Pokemon cards or to baseball cards or sports memorabilia. This just happens to be different plants from around the world that are alive.
What is the handle for your Instagram account for those that are curious?
Crazy 4 Cactus, and the 4 is a number. Crazy number 4 Cactus.
We'll have to point people there and check it out.
Definitely.
You mentioned these cactus shows. Didn't you actually speak at some of those?
I've done a few, yeah. And I think my career being in front of people, executive leaders, building, project status reports or steering committee meetings, I've gotten comfortable in front of the crowds. And so, having that many followers and being involved with the community to the degree that I am, people, I guess, think I'm some sort of an expert or I know what I'm talking about, right? And so I've traveled a bit to Mexico. I'm an avid photographer. And so, I believe that I take some pretty fantastic photos. I mean, they're my pictures, but and so they want presentations on different things. And so I've gone out to a few different clubs. I've done a presentation on Euphorbiaceae, which is a really interesting genus of plants. And then plants that we have in California native are Dudleya, but Dudleya expand all the way into Mexico and other areas. And so there's a lot of different kinds of those. And so, I've done presentations on Dudleya as well and done presentations on a trip that I made to Mexico where we hit a couple different islands that, certain cactus species and things only grow on these islands 2 hours off the coast of Baja, Mexico. And so, really talking about these adventures and showcasing the pictures that I've taken, not super technical presentations, more of a feast for the eyes, if you will.
Any causes or charities that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I'm big into conservation. And ironically, my daughter just started freshman year high school and she's started a conservation club. So there's a lot of different types of Dudleya, but there are quite a few that are close to extinction and really primarily related to poaching. There's a big market for those plants in Asia. There's a lot of different plants that are poached for different reasons. They bring a lot of money. And so, we're raising awareness on the habitat destruction, on, poaching efforts and just creating awareness for, these plants native to California, native to at least where I live and local. So trying to have a direct impact to nature in our backyard.
Very cool. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences with the listeners of Underserved.
Thanks, Andrew. Had a great conversation. Thank you so much.
And we'll talk to everyone soon on the next episode of Underserved.
Thank you for listening to the Underserved podcast. For more information on the topics discussed and for show notes, visit the show website, underserved.fm. And please be sure to rate, like, and subscribe to Underserved on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.